Hi, my name is Jeffro, and this is Digital Dominance, the podcast for service-based small business owners who are ready to seize the recognition and growth that their company deserves. You've worked hard to build a business you're proud of. Now it's time for Digital Domination. Welcome back to Digital Dominance. As an organization grows, it can drift away from the values it was founded upon. This is often because the founder is too busy to focus on proper training or creating a company culture as they try to keep up with their company's growth. But what does that have to do with digital marketing? As it turns out, quite a lot. For example, if your team doesn't understand the vision, then the messaging that they put in your ads and your website will not be consistent and won't represent your company the way it should. Now, this is a unique episode because I'm supposed to have two guests, Bart McCollum and Dr. Gerald Hannah. Dr. Hannah is trying to join right now, so hopefully he'll pop on any minute. Together, they have written a book called You Before Me, which is designed to tackle this challenge of company culture. But rather than write this as a typical business book, they decided to write it as a novel. So buckle up because we're going to dip our toes into behavioral psychology and company culture in order to get our teams in alignment and shore up the marketing messages that we put out in the world. So welcome to the show.
It's great to be here, Jeffro.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you. And, first of all, let's make sure we know who this is for. When you're talking about company culture within a team, how big of a team are we talking about? Do these concepts apply to someone with 2 employees, or does it need to be a bigger team?
No, it applies really for any team where there's more than one layer. So if you're managing a department of people inside of a company, or if you're an entrepreneur, you have a marketing agency or any business, and you're trying to get past a certain point and you have people that are working for you, whether as contractors or as full-time employees, then this is something that applies to you 100%.
Right. So as long as you're not by yourself and your team, you can apply some of this stuff.
Yeah, and even if you're by yourself, there's competencies that we're going to talk about in here that apply to you in any relation, dealing with customers, getting a heart for what a vision is, and so on and so forth. But yeah, it's primarily directed towards people that are trying to lead in an organization.
Got it. That makes sense.
I'm here.
Hello, Dr. Hannah. Thank you for joining us. Can you hear me okay?
Well, I apologize. Good to see you both. And Bart, thank you for helping me here. So
we were just talking about how this whole idea of company culture, it also affects your marketing, because if your people aren't in alignment with your values, and what they're telling prospects isn't going to line up either. So Bart, just let me know that this can apply to any size team, really, as long as you're not just a solopreneur. You've got stuff to learn here. So my next question for you guys is, what's your definition of company culture?
So this is really interesting because this is one of those really squishy terms that gets thrown around quite a bit. And I've been working on and in various organizations now for coming up on 2 decades. And I've never had a definition that I've been 100% comfortable with. What I like is culture is what gets rewarded at an organization. So behaviorally, what gets rewarded. So a lot of times that's something that's implied. It may be the way that the person that created the organization behaves, and everybody kind of emulates that. Usually it's not, what might be written on a break room wall or talked about. It's really how people treat each other. So it's what's reinforced in that environment.
Yeah,
well, I like that definition.
I
Go ahead, Dr. Hannah.
That a culture, or when I come to work every day, I know how to act. I understand what's expected. What are the values and behaviors that I'm supposed to show every day?
Got it. So it's more than just a pinball machine and donuts on Fridays, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Correct. Yeah.
Right.
So what are some signs then of a healthy company culture? Is
the organization performing well would be one, and are the people engaged? And engaged is actually it's a measurable thing, and so you'll hear a term. Morale used a lot. Do the people that work within an organization have high morale? Morale is another squishy term that doesn't necessarily have a specific measurable definition. There is something called engagement. And so if you have a high performing organization and you have good engagement, and engagement is typically pretty low. There's lots of data on this. Gallup does a lot of research on it. And so if you're doing better than average, I would say you have a reasonably good culture. And if it's important to you. So if part of your culture is improving that, If that's built into your values, I would say that you have a high performing culture, or at least you're on your way.
How do you assess your current culture, so to even know if it needs work, especially if you got a large team, you might not be in tune with everybody. So how do you go about doing that?
So a lot of it is, so there's two things. One is you can measure it. So Dr. Hannah and I actually, we use a survey. He co-developed it, and it's based on the Gallup stuff that I kind of just talked about. So there is a set of questions that you can go and you poll all the people that you work with, and you want to do that a few times a year, and you get measurable results. That's an indication. Another one is if you have some of the competencies that we talk about in this book. One of them is emotional intelligence, and that's another term that typically can be mismanaged or misused, or people can think of that term and have different definitions for it. But it's a very specific, measurable thing. If you have that and you practice that, you can see in an organization how healthy the culture is. You can see, again, how people treat each other. Are they operating on a team? Are they resentful? Are they happy? Are they productive? Are they trying to improve? Those sorts of things. So it's really two things. It's a subjective, but with some highly tuned eyes, being able to see how people actually act and behave and treat each other. And it's also objectively measurable.
Gotcha. Dr. Hannah, did you want to add anything?
Well, yeah, just to, the survey looks at three parts of a culture. My experience individually, my experience with my manager, and then my experience with the policies of the organization and how I'm treated by senior people. Again, Gallup's been doing this for 30 years, and so engagement is a critical part, a piece of data that every organization needs to have.
Okay. Well, that makes sense. And, Bart, you mentioned the competencies, the behavioral competencies. Sometimes they're called soft skills, right? Emotional intelligence, teamwork, communication, that sort of stuff. Now, I would assume that if you didn't know about this when you were starting your company and you weren't originally hiring for these traits, then you're going to have a harder time turning the culture around. Is that true in your experience?
So, I think probably a lot of your listenership are entrepreneurs, and they're certainly probably serving entrepreneurs. And so, that prototypical kind of profile is somebody who is really high achieving. In our book, we have a character, and this is a novelization. It's a super high achieving person who's not great at teamwork. Sometimes you get a unicorn. You get somebody who's an amazing sort of gunslinger when it comes to standing something up and getting it going, and then also scaling an organization and being a great team player and a leader of teams. That's extremely rare. You're talking about a Steve Jobs, a Bill Gates. I don't even know that an Elon Musk would qualify. You have to, entrepreneurs get to a certain point, typically, if they're really high achieving and they're really successful, and they peak because the kind of things that they did to be able to create something in the first place and create some value for people and deliver some value to customers, eventually they're having to do things that are completely alien to them in order to be able to get to the next level. And what we're hoping to help people do is, take that high achieving person who is now in a position where they're actually having to change some of their their wiring and develop some of these competencies. That's how they're going to be able to lead people and then take whatever they're doing and then sort of elevate it to the next level.
Okay, so whether they're high achieving or not, if they just don't have these skills, it's going to take a little while to kind of instill those values and, incentivize those behaviors, right?
Yeah, most people will have some version of these things at some level. It'll be kind of all over the place. Some people are naturally, endowed with being able to lead an effective team and be an optimistic leader. And again, we have specific definitions for those things. But generally speaking, what people default to when they've created something, marketing agency, brand, that kind of a thing, is they have some kind of really strong vision and they're very hard charging towards that vision. That is one particular style. And you have to be able to inspire people to be able to go alongside you once you get to a certain point if you want to continue to be able to to be successful in that. But you have to pivot and do other things, and you have to develop these other competencies, these other behaviors in order to be able to do that, or you'll burn people out, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, again, a small company, you could hire a person who has outstanding ethics, and they're a high achiever. They get things done, but they can't work with people. Oh, and they got promoted to be a manager or a supervisor, and they can't work with people. And the culture, if the culture is solid in terms of we treat people with dignity and respect, then that person is gone. I just had a phone call late this morning exactly about this. She's in her 32 years old. You would hire her tomorrow, and you would have to dismiss her in 6 months because she couldn't work with anybody. And it's in a small company particularly.
So let's say there's a company that has no culture. They never put any thought into it, and they've maybe created some bad habits. How long would it take to, bring you guys in to read a book? Now they're going to start applying this stuff to go from no culture to a healthy culture.
Well, so I'd say every place has a culture. Every organization, every team has some kind of a culture. The question is, how intentional are you about it? So I think kind of maybe what I'm inferring in your question is, what if they don't have a particularly healthy culture, or one that would that would attract people who would want to kind of go along whatever that ride is, what are we trying to accomplish? What's our vision? Where are we headed? In theory, you could be doing this stuff immediately. Like this stuff is, one of the things that's interesting about this material is it's half a century of research behind this. This is stuff that Dr. Hannah has worked with in some very large organizations. It dates back to the 1960s, and it is the most robust scientific-backed research on how to get high-performing teams out there. It's been adopted and used by large organizations for decades. The problem is it hasn't trickled into mid-sized organizations, smaller organizations, nonprofits, entrepreneurial places, marketing agencies. Most marketing agencies are pretty small, and there are reasons for that. It hasn't gotten to those places because it's kind of scientific, it's kind of academic, and we've tried to create a way for it to be digestible by any person. Any person can pick this up and start doing it. And so it isn't that hard. It's simple stuff, but it requires you to create the habits. You got to do it every single day. And so until it's important enough for somebody to make time to do that stuff every single day, then it doesn't stick. But it's actually pretty easy to start working on and practicing and rewiring the brain and so on and so forth, and turning that culture around if that's what you need to do.
Got it. Well, I almost feel like it would be easier to do this in a smaller, medium-sized team, because in the larger organizations, a lot of this gets lost in translation, doesn't scale as well. And, you got to figure out a way to infuse your culture and values into everything without it feeling like just another corporate slideshow that I have to sit through so I could tick the box that said I did my required trainings this quarter, because I've wanted to poke my eye with a stick after going through some of these trainings, and they would say, yes, we have culture. See, everybody took these trainings. They know our values, right? So what do we do about that?
Yeah, so this is like, there's nothing passive about this. And so, Dr. Hannah is a behavioral psychologist, and the key word there is behavioral. This isn't sitting on a couch and psychotherapy or anything. It's not passively watching some webinar, doing some corporate training. That doesn't actually change behavior in most cases. This is very, very simple, journaling every single day and picking what are the top 3 things that I want to work on, again, based on the material in the book, based on the scientific research, and deliberately reflecting on it. I know a lot of your listeners are probably familiar with meditation and probably have found good use of that. This is not meditation, but it's something similar. It is a very deliberate, daily, short practice that literally rewires your brain. It literally makes new connections in your brain and creates habits around these behaviors. And so it is easier to do that in a smaller organization if it's important enough to the organization, because it's fewer people that actually have to engage in the process.
Right. Yeah. Just let me give an example of Bart's done a good job in talking about the practice every day. So self-awareness. Self-awareness is where I am aware of my thoughts, feelings, and strong emotions. And only the human, has control over those things. There are a lot of things in life you have no control over, but you have control over your thought process, your moods, your emotions. So the neuroscientists have showed us how to create that as a habit. Every day, at the end of the day, you think of 2 conversations you had, and you log 1 sentence, what I notice about myself. I was bored. I was this. I was that. And that neuron that runs up to the amygdala gland is now getting you customized to being aware of yourself, so that when you're having a conversation with your boss and your boss says something that's stupid, that amygdala gland in the brain gives you about a second. And if you don't catch it, then it continues that thought, and then the amygdala gland controls the muscles in your face, your pulse rate, and it's like, what's wrong, Jeffro? Something's going. What did I say something wrong? So when you practice it, you become really good. Then you can control yourself. So this is the foundation of being an outstanding person as well as a leader, is being really good at the self-awareness piece.
So you've really got to get everyone on the team on board with doing their own personal development through this deliberate practice. Otherwise, you're not going to get anywhere.
Exactly. Right. Well, and again, that comes back to the culture. So our expectation is you're going to really get good, and we'll call it social skills or emotional intelligence, which has 4 parts. We're all going to get good at this. This is required. Or, like the 32-year-old this morning, she's dismissed, and she's an outstanding performer, but there's baggage everywhere, and it's a small company. It's about less than 200, about 200 people.
So I think everyone's coming from a different starting place, though, right? So how do you put in fair expectations for people as you're moving forward? Is it okay in 30 days if you're not a team player, then you got to go? How do you assess that?
Well, I would say, if it's important enough to you to sort of bring this into your organization, everybody can read the book. It's very entertaining. It's super engaging. It's very digestible, and people can be working on it immediately. Again, as to whether if you're an entrepreneur and you own an organization, or you've started an organization, you've got people, and you have people issues, which everybody does. It's up to you to answer the question. Well, I have somebody here who's super talented at X or Y. Like my SEO team, for example, or my creative team. My creative team is probably really creative, and maybe they have a lot of strong ideas, and maybe they don't get along with some of the other folks that I have. Very common thing inside marketing agencies and other similar enterprises. It's up to you to decide, well, gosh, how long am I going to tolerate this? And if I'm seeing nice improvement in this area, is that good enough for me? So it's really up to the, how dysfunctional or functional is that teamwork happening? That would dictate, again, how much patience you have with it. The nice thing about this stuff, though, is a person who is willing to invest in that small amount of time to go and actually kind of do this development work for themselves can make improvements in very, very short time frame. So you can see major improvements in a month or less. Again, if somebody's taking the time to do this deliberately every single day.
Got it. Can you guys share an example of a company that kind of followed some of these methodologies, and what did that look like in practice, before and after?
Yeah, so I think, I don't want to speak for Dr. Hannah, some of the primary kind of research that was done on this was through a consulting company. I think it's called Korn Ferry now. They're a big company. They did this, I think, what's the big insurance company they did it at? It was a project that you were on.
Well, American
State
Express,
Farm, I think. Yeah, it was like tens of thousands of people at State Farm.
Yeah, it's been written. That project's been written up. Yeah, State Farm Insurance. So real quickly, State Farm Insurance in the mid-90s was controlled 80% of all insurance and auto and home. And McKinsey came in, did an analysis at their request of their future strategy. And the report basically said, you're not going to be controlling auto and home anymore because of the internet. And secondly, you need to broaden and you need to get better talent and so forth. So, we'll hire you. Now, I love this story because it's true. McKinsey goes, oh, wait a minute. We don't do the work. We do the analysis. Call the Hay Group. They were called the Hay Group at that. Been around since 1942. So we came in and helped the leaders of State Farm create the culture. They had something like 25,000 agents. They wanted us to assess all of them. We said, no, we only want to assess your outstanding, what you considered outstanding. And so, anyhow, we get into all of that. And lo and behold, State Farm not only survived, but really became a great company to work for. Before then, they were just sort of moving, hey, we own everything. We control everything. Didn't care. No, that's a great company. American Express is another. IBM, they were in the early stages of creating behavioral competencies.
Yeah, and Dr. Hannah and I have taken this model and we've implemented it at a bunch of different organizations. And so I was CEO of a healthcare payments company for a long time, and Dr. Hannah worked with me and our leadership team there, and actually still does work with the leadership team at that company. I now am on the executive team of Lime Media Group. We're one of the largest experiential marketing agencies in the country. And we use these methods here, and it's helped us grow and scale our organization. And a lot of our cohorts, a lot of our competitors, again, don't get beyond a certain point because you have a lot of really smart, creative people. But scaling that requires teamwork and requires a certain kind of humility. It requires being able to practice these competencies, these behaviors. And that is often very, very difficult, a left turn to make when you're used to being in a kind of creative atmosphere.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I like, Dr. Hannah, you mentioned that you don't have to assess everybody. You just got to get an understanding of the teams and the culture so that you can make adjustments, and then it will affect everybody. Right.
Exactly.
So that does mean there's hope for those large organizations.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
So I also want to make a point here before we get to the end of our time. So building an internal company culture, it kind of sounds just like inward focused marketing. Right. In other episodes, we've talked about how to convey a message to your prospects on your website. This is kind of the same thing, only you're communicating your values to your own team. Obviously, the message is going to be a little bit different because it's more about how we act, how we treat our customers, what we care about, etc. But you're coming up with ways to convince them or persuade them of the importance of this and get them to be on board. Right. Do you agree?
I would say so. This gets to the heart of kind of branding and marketing, which is you want whatever the brand is, it needs to have the same. It needs to have a consistent message. It needs to be very, very clear to whoever is experiencing that brand. And so like sometimes what people will do, and frequently what people will do is they'll say, okay, here is our values, here's our culture, or here's our brand, here's our internal brand, here's what we want to create, here's the experience we want our employees to have. And again, they'll create some really pretty materials and might even throw it up on the website. They might apply for some awards, throw it up in the break room, et cetera, et cetera. If it's not backed up by actual action from the top down, then again, like it becomes not credible. And so what I have done successfully with Dr. Hannah's help is these competencies that we talk about in our book, connect those to actual statements of your value proposition at your company. And so when we have a company culture, we actually have some values. At Lime Media, we have love, accountability, and evolution. Those are kind of our three company values. Well, we don't stop with that. We actually have a list of it's around 21 specific behaviors that roll up to those values. Those behaviors are tied back to these behavioral competencies that we talk about. So again, it goes back to the science. It goes back to the actual things that make people work well in high-performing organizations. And so the culture We have this cool sizzle with what the culture is, and we have, artifacts. We have marketing material. We have copy. We have branding. We have swag that we wear. You get to see my hat. We have cards that people carry around in their wallets. That's all great, but it has to actually tie back to something tangible and something specific, and that's the practice that we're talking about, and it's what we talk about in the book. So without those two things, it's kind of toothless.
Right. It's all talk. Right.
They'll talk. Yeah.
Well, that's a great summary. And I think that's kind of a great thought to, wrap up on, because, once you understand that, then you've got a lot of possibilities there in terms of moving forward. So
Absolutely.
Thank you both for joining me today. Personal development is a huge part of entrepreneurship. This discussion is a great example of that direct connection between the leader and the team, and ultimately the effect it has on the business. So for those of you guys listening, check out the links in the show notes. Go pick up your copy of You Before Me and give it a read. It's a very entertaining novel version of a business book where you actually get all this value while watching it being applied, which is a really kind of cool way to learn. Last question for you guys today. What is the single most important behavior someone can improve upon if they want to be successful?
Oh. Well,
you got your answer? Go for it.
Yeah, it's the emotional intelligence. It's your ability to manage yourself, and from that, I'm able to be aware of what's in front of me and listen and connect and be a good listener to others. There's a thing called unintentional blindness. You couldn't find your car keys this morning, and they were right in front of you because your thoughts were somewhere else. And so it's getting really, this age now is we've got to be able to manage ourselves, our thoughts, our feelings, and be able to engage with people.
My answer is the same, Jeffro. It's kind of the foundational thing.
Yeah.
You have to kind of build that foundation before you kind of stack things on top of it, or everything kind of topples over. So it's developing the behaviors within emotional intelligence.
Right.
Yeah, and that's obviously a skill that's going to apply elsewhere in life too, with all your relationships.
Absolutely. Right.
Yeah. At the end of the day, this is all about people. So absolutely.
Okay, well, that's awesome. Thanks again for being here, guys. And thanks to all of you for listening. Please be sure to like and subscribe. Share this episode with someone who might like it. Take care, and I'll see you all back here for the next episode of Digital Dominance. Thanks for tuning in to the Digital Dominance Podcast. This show is brought to you by FroBro.com. FroBro is on a mission to rid the world of terrible websites, and we love helping our clients grow their businesses as big as our hair. Right now, FroBro is offering an SEO plus leads bundle where you can get warm leads every month without having to wait for the SEO to ramp up. To learn more, go to FroBroLeads.com.